It is Saturday, April 19th, 2025. Welcome to another live stream of the Dan Norton Show. There's something I've been wanting to test, which is whether I can increase the volume on my mic by turning this little knob here. So I'm just going to do a test. Okay, I've turned it up all the way to the max, and I wonder if it now sounds different. Let me know in the chat if you can. And I'm going to turn it down now as I am speaking back to about where it was. I'm not sure I'll get it exactly right, but I'm curious to see if you can tell any difference at all when I do this. And if so, whether it's better when I had it at the max or before I made any changes. Anyways, feel free to let me know. So today I was reading some about Israel that was partly motivated by the discussion I was having last time. There was someone in the chat, Darwin, as well as Nadal, and a lot of the time they were talking about Israel, which I'm certainly not an expert on. I've read a bit about it, but I want to know a lot more about it. And I decided to take a little break from my reading about Middle Ages history in England and spent a few hours, maybe a couple hours or so this morning reading about Israel. Just in general, the entire history of this state, going back to prehistoric times all the way up till the present. So it was just a broad overview. And I've read more in detail about certain parts of the history, like the War of Independence in 48, just for example. And I want to dig into Israel in a lot more detail, but not sure exactly when I will. So it's partly determined by what comes up in the chat. I guess when something is a topic on people's minds, especially people who drop by this chat and want to discuss it, that adds to my motivation to spend some time learning about it. Darwin made a comment on my last live stream, which I haven't responded to, but I did publish it. So, as I said in the last live stream, comments you make on my channel are moderated, so they don't automatically appear publicly unless I approve them. Until then, only you can see them and only I can see them, but no one else can. But I thought his comment was fine to publish, so I went ahead and published it. It was something about calling Israel an apartheid state, I think. Forget exactly what he said. Maybe I should go back to that now. And I don't know if I'll have anything to say about it now. I did address it a little bit when it came up in the last show. But maybe if I look at it again, I will think of some more things to say. And I'm also interested in what new topics you all are interested in discussing or hearing about. This is a listener-driven show, at least to a large extent, so you all can shape the topics that we discuss together. So feel free to put in the chat anything that's on your mind that you'd like to discuss. I put out a new video on my channel. That's another piece of news. It's just an announcement about the fact that I'm doing live streaming. So maybe some of you saw that. I wanted to have a video on the um, the video tab of my channel. So there's the way YouTube has a separate section for pre-recorded videos, which is just called video or videos. And then it has a different section on live videos, which is called live. So I wanted to have a video in the video section in case people don't see the live section. Sometimes maybe people, they only come across pre-recorded videos and they don't look in the live section. So I wanted to have something in the video section, the pre-recorded section, to notify people that I'm now doing live streams in case they didn't find out elsewhere. So I published that video yesterday. It's just a short 2-minute video. And um, I will continue doing pre-recorded videos. There's no strict schedule on them. It's kind of whenever I happen to have some content. I've got a couple pieces of content in the pipeline, two discussions, or one was more of a debate, and those will be coming out in the coming weeks. I just got the raw footage of one of them from somebody else who hosted it. So let's see, both of these were hosted on someone else's YouTube channel. One was a show I called into, kind of like this. So it's a live stream that I called into, and the other one was just a pre-recorded uh, video, which eventually came out on someone else's channel. But he was the host, so I was his guest. But he it was he said I could also post it on my channel. So I got the raw footage of the video from him, and I need to edit that. And then once that's ready, I'll put that on my channel. That'll show up in the video tab, not the live tab, because it's pre-recorded. And likewise with the debate that I did, the call-in show. All right, see, we got our first comment of the day from Primal. Hi, Primal. Welcome back. I saw you in a recent live stream. Primal says, is there a certain IQ that makes one deal with abstract ideas and be interested in philosophy as a whole? Okay. Never thought of that question before. By the way, if anyone wants to call in, I have pinned the Zoom link in the chat. So all you need to do is click on that, and that will get you into the waiting room on Zoom. So feel free to do that if anyone wants to call in. But in the meantime, I'm just going to engage with chat. I guess I'll give priority to a caller if someone wants to call in. But until that point, I will give my attention to the chat. So, Primal, is there a certain IQ that makes one deal with abstract ideas and be interested in philosophy as a whole? Not that I'm aware of. This is not a question I've considered before, but off the top of my head, I would think that maybe there has to be some threshold level of intelligence. Like maybe you could use you could think of animals like chimpanzees are as our nearest relatives, and they're not interested in philosophy. They have no conception of philosophy. So you might think that if there's a degree of intelligence with humans on one end of the scale, and then going down, you get chimpanzees somewhat lower, and dogs somewhat lower, fish even lower. Um, there's a, I guess there would have to be a certain point which someone has to, or something, some organism has to be some IQ threshold that they have to cross in order to be capable of considering philosophy. Ayn Rand has an article called The Missing Link, which I was reminded of in thinking about this question. I think that might deal with what she calls the anti-conceptual mentality. These are people who they have a faculty of concepts, but they don't really use it, or they don't use it uh, as much as they should or could. Anyways, they're not functioning at the full human potential. So, but I don't know if that's an issue of of IQ. It might be an issue of choice. Um, maybe they could function at a conceptual level, but they choose not to, or maybe they just don't know how. Or it could vary. Maybe some people uh, know how, but just choose not to, and others simply don't know how, um, and they couldn't do so even if they wanted. But I guess there has to be some IQ threshold. If you think of there being a continuum of intelligence going down from, a genius like Isaac Newton going down to snails, uh, uh, yeah, there's got to be some point at which one is no longer capable of dealing with abstract ideas or being interested in philosophy. I just don't know exactly what that point is. So those are some off the top of my head thoughts on that question. Thanks for participating, Primal. So we got uh, 6 people here now. Anyone else want to ask a question or just say hello? Make a comment. Um, Glad to have you all here. Uh, so let's see what else. I guess there aren't any other chats right now. I could tell you a bit about what I've been reading. I did mention. Oh, guess I'll postpone that for a second at least because Darwin is back and he says hi. Hi, Darwin. Um, you were probably the person who chatted the most in the last show. I was talking a few minutes ago about how I approved your comments on my last video. I didn't answer it on, I didn't reply to your comment, but I thought maybe I would say something in this live stream. Um, but then Primal came in with a question. So you had 2 comments on my last live stream, Darwin. One was about apartheid in Israel, which I read a little about, not apartheid in particular, but just Israel in general. Um, but maybe I'll have some more. Maybe we can engage some more today about Israel if you're interested in that. Um, but anyways, welcome back. See, we got a couple more comments from Primal. He's, he asks, has James Valiant ever been on the Yaron Brook Show? I don't think so. At least I don't remember seeing him ever be on the Yaron Brook Show. And then you say, I've never seen them interact with each other. Nor have I. I don't recall ever seeing them interact. Okay, so let's just quick answers um, to that. Uh, yeah, I don't know if there's any bad blood there or uh, or what. Um, Not sure. Maybe I shouldn't speculate. Um, but the short answer is just no. Um, or at least to my knowledge, the answer is no. So let's see. I guess that gets me back to. I'm thinking about Darwin now because he showed up in the chat. So I want to go back to Darwin's comments on my last live stream. Let's see if I can find it here. Okay, so he says it's not a smear. The majority of human rights organizations agree Israel is an apartheid state. Unquote from Darwin. That was a comment that Darwin left on my last live stream. Not in the live chat, but just in the comment below the video. So one thought I had on that, Darwin, is I don't have much confidence in what so-called human rights organizations say. I don't know which ones in particular you have in mind, but I I tend to associate that term human rights organizations with the United Nations, which I don't think is a good organization. There could be many other unaffiliated human rights organizations, but um, I guess there are some affiliated with the UN, and I don't think the UN is a legit organization. It has authoritarian regimes in positions of power, major positions of power, like Russia is a member of the Security Council uh, with a kind of veto power. And I think they, uh, so if an organization is a big tent umbrella sort of organization, which um, has brutal regimes as members of it, brutal authoritarian regimes, I think that illegitimizes or delegitimizes the organization as having a claim to be concerned with something like human rights. Um, I think a country like Russia should probably be kicked out of an organization which is concerned with human rights. I guess there's this United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which I think um, most, which I'm not very familiar with. Um, so there could be many pseudo rights in there, like the right to a job or the right to a certain health care. And I could talk about why I say those are pseudo rights, but I think there are many organizations around the world whose opinion I think is not really valid. So I'm not really concerned what a body like the UN says about Israel. See, we got some more comments coming in now. All right, we're starting to get going here. Let me see what else is coming in. Uh, okay, so Darwin says BT Selim, I guess that's a human rights organization, agrees with his assessment. It boils down to apartheid has a specific meaning that applies to what Israel is doing. Okay. Are these, would you also say uh, Israel is engaged in a genocide, because I think that's a smear. And I think probably a lot of the same people who would say Israel is an apartheid state would say that Israel is engaged in genocide, um, which I think is uh, very wrong. So um, I think a claim like that Israel is engaged in genocide, when you can be an Arab and be in the Knesset, for example, um, I think that a claim like that about Israel, that it's engaged in genocide, just really damages the credibility of any other claims that someone will make. So if it's the same person that says Israel is engaged in genocide, who's also saying Israel is an apartheid state, well, I don't really put much stock in that. Um, okay, um, let me see what else there. It's what else is coming here? Okay, Darwin says you can ignore the human rights organizations if you wish. Yeah, I certainly will, but not arbitrarily. It's for the sorts of reasons that I've been giving. Um, I think there are good reasons to ignore what certain organizations say. And then Primal comes in with, he says that's totally ignorance among the many lies being told about Israel. So I guess he's replying to Darwin there. And Darwin says, explain why there is a 99% plus conviction rate for Palestinians in the West Bank. Statistically impossible. I just remembered something, Darwin, that I wanted to ask you, and I asked you this last time, actually. I don't know if you remember this, but I asked you, do you think Israel in general is a better country than its neighboring countries? Do you think it's a more rights respecting country than its neighboring countries? Now, if your answer to that is no, Israel is not in general a better, more rights respecting place than the neighboring countries, then that really raises a question in my mind about your credibility. Because I think it's pretty clear that Israel is better, whatever its problems. I think it's definitely better than the neighboring countries. So if someone can't agree at least to that as kind of like a baseline reality check for a discussion, then anything else they say, I wonder, is it even worth considering if they can't agree to something like that? So, do you want to say what your view is on that, Darwin? Is Israel at least a better country, a more rights respecting country than its neighbors? Okay, you just came in with you said in comparison to Lebanon. Sure. Lebanon, Jordan, um, Egypt, Syria. Um, we can go a little further out. Iraq, Iran, take the Middle East more broadly. Um, you say, what do I mean by better? More rights respecting. Um, uh, so, I mean, that could raise a question of what rights are, but so okay, so you're saying um, okay, so Darwin is not saying yes yet that Israel is more rights respecting. He's raising questions in response to my question. So maybe we should focus on this issue then, because I think this is uh, maybe an issue that should be resolved before trying to debate other issues. Um, so, so okay, Darwin is coming back with more comments. Got some from Primal as well. Okay, now we got one from Darwin that says they're marginally better. Sure. Okay, well that's at least something. Something. So maybe there are some people who wouldn't even say that much, but I am glad that we are at least on the same page about that. Um, okay, so maybe there's a basis for further discussion. Um, well, thanks for that answer, Darwin. I appreciate that. And then I guess one could argue how much better, but I don't know that it's worth trying to go down that road. Um, but you're elaborating on your answer now, I see. So you say they treat their Jewish constituents well only because they have socialized medicine and a good safety net. Otherwise, it's a prodigiously terroristic state, says Darwin. So I'm worried that that Darwin is smearing Israel, which is why I didn't approve the comment from CPG, who was on here a few live streams ago. He put a comment on a video which I was concerned might contain a bunch of smears of Israel, alleged lies Israel has told. So I haven't approved that comment, which is not to say I never will, but I didn't feel comfortable right now approving that comment. I guess if I'm here to push back against something that I sense might be a smear, then it's not as big a deal. It's not as problematic if it shows up on my channel because I can debate it. But if I don't have time to debate something, like if someone writes a long comment on my channel that I think is just full of smears, and I don't think I'm going to have time to address it, maybe I just want to prove that. I'm not sure. There's still some aspects of my comment policy and my chat policy which I need to figure out. It's a work in progress. It's kind of evolving over time. But anyways, I'm just giving you an insight into some of the considerations that go through my mind and how I deal with certain things. Um, okay, so you got more coming in from Darwin, and oh, we got Nadal back. Hi, Nadal. He says, "What time is it in my place? I'm on Pacific time, so uh, it's 1:58 p.m. here right now. Wonder what time you're in." And by the way, Darwin is commenting the most, but don't feel like you can't comment as well. I mean, just because I'm engaging on Israel right now doesn't mean we can't engage on other issues. Um, I don't want to skip around too much so that it becomes disorienting. And so maybe while we've got some momentum on the topic of Israel, we'll stick with that for a while. But feel free to raise different issues, and I'll try to balance the time somewhat um, so that I give different people uh, a chance to be engaged with. Um, And also, oh, you say it's 10 p.m. where you are. Okay, so you're 8 hours ahead. Okay, I guess that means you're in Europe. I thought maybe you were in Netherlands last time because you were having a little chat in Dutch, I think, with one of the other Ignosti, something like that was the name last time. So maybe you're in the Netherlands too. Anyways, welcome back. Okay. Now some of you might just be happy to watch the discussion about Israel, and that's okay. Oh, Belgium, you say? Okay. You might be the second person because I remember someone else, maybe it was you, but I thought the name was different. Someone else from Belgium was on my chat in a previous live stream. But okay. So I guess Belgium has its own language, right? Belgian? Maybe it's close to Dutch. I don't know. All right. Uh, so let me go back to some of these comments from Darwin, who who did say Israel is marginally better. Okay, so let's see what else is there. I might skip over some comments. It's hard to keep track of everything, so I might not go through all of them or necessarily in order. But uh, oh, okay, we got some. Chachi is back. Hi, Chachi. He says, "Thank you, Dr. Norton, for having these chat/slash debates. I do have a question about Ayn Rand." All right. Well, feel free to raise your question. Welcome back. Okay, I think you were another European, maybe. Um, oh, we got a new person, Adwick Gore. Adwick Gore. Adwick Gore says, "I thought Ayn Rand was a man for so long," with two crying emojis. Okay, I that might be a new one to me. I don't remember anyone saying that before. Uh, it is an unusual name, Ayn. So if you only saw the name, you wouldn't really know what sex it is, um, or how to pronounce it. At least in the United States, I don't think I had ever come across an Ein before, and a lot of people say Anne, uh, and until they're corrected. I think Ayn Rand might have once said that Ein rhymes with mine. Maybe that's a good way to remember it, because she's about egoism, doing something for myself. So Ein, mine. Maybe that's how you can remember it. But it seems like people might be pronouncing it more correctly these days. It's less common that I hear people saying "an" than when I first got into ejectivism like 25 years ago or more, actually. I heard "an" a lot, but these days I hear a lot of people saying "ein," um, which maybe that's good and a little sign of improvement. Um, Darwin says you don't have to read through all my comments. Just putting them out there. Thank you, Darwin. Appreciate that. I do appreciate your comments, but yeah, I do like to spread the time around some, and maybe I'll get back to some of your comments. Um, but yeah, I can't necessarily keep up with all of them. Um, so let's see. By the way, if you like the stream, I'd appreciate it if you click on that thumbs up button, give it a like. That'll help me out. And also appreciate subscriptions. That'll help the channel grow. So thanks of those of you who have done that. Okay. Uh, So, Adwick Gore, I wonder when you came across Ayn Rand's, was that recently? I guess as soon as you see a picture of Ayn Rand, a photo, you can know that she's a woman, um, or at least have a good reason to believe she's a woman. I guess these days, where the trans movement is become much more prominent, you might see someone who looks like who you think is a woman who actually is not. That raises a whole issue. Uh, some people might think a trans woman is actually a woman. Not sure I want to go into that topic right now. I have a short video on my channel about the trans issue. It's but anyways, welcome to the channel, Adwick. Well, I don't know if it's a new channel for you, but at least it's the first time I remember seeing you. Okay, so here's let me go through some more of these comments. Um, Chachi says Ayn Rand had a loving affair with Dr. Nathaniel Branden. However, she still clearly loved Frank O'Connor. My question is, dot, dot, dot. And then he continues in his next comment. Can a person have such passion for two individuals that they could have sexual relations with both concurrently? Okay. So for anyone who doesn't know, Ayn Rand was married to Frank O'Connor, but then she had an affair with the permission of her husband, Frank O'Connor, the knowledge and consent of her husband. She had an affair with Nathaniel Branden, who originally was just a student of hers, and he was 25 years younger than she was. So that's the background for this question that Chachi is asking. And I guess this affair first came to public light after Ayn Rand died. And um, Chachi is asking, he asks, can a person have such passion for two individuals that they could have sexual relations with both concurrently? I don't see why not. I think you could have a passion or love for two individuals simultaneously, that you could have sexual relationships with both. That might cause problems, but I don't see why you couldn't have a feeling or a passion towards someone or towards two people um, such that you could have sex with both. Um, maybe you're thinking that if you really love someone, then that would prohibit you from having sex with the other person, because if you have sex with the other person, then that damages your love for the first person you were with. So you don't really love them or have a passion for them. If you were really passionate about them, you would reserve all of your sexual life just for that person. Is that the idea behind your question? Um, if so, I'm not sure about that. I'm doubtful of that. There can be degrees of passion for a person. Um, maybe, I'm not saying this is the case, but you might at least wonder if it's the case that you love someone more intensely if you reserve sex entirely for them. And maybe you could love a person while having sex with another person, but that would be a sign that you don't love them as much as if you reserved sex entirely for them. Maybe. I think that's one could at least consider that. It's not, I don't think that's a crazy thing to consider, but I don't, I don't know that I have a definitive answer. I don't think I have a definitive view on that myself. So, those are some thoughts off the top of my head about that question. And just to finish the story of Ayn Rand's life on this aspect of it, at least, um, Ayn Rand eventually had a break with Nathaniel Branden. So I think that she first met him, I I want to say 1950, and that was, or at least close to that year. So Ayn Rand would have been 45 years old, and Nathaniel Branden would have been 20. I think that's right. I read the biography or the memoirs written by Nathaniel Branden, as well as his wife. He was also married. He was married to Barbara Branden at the time, um, and uh, the affair started sometime in the 50s. I think the mid 50s, maybe around 1955, and then it continued for, I guess, 13 years till 1968. And then there was a big falling out, a big break, and I don't think it was only related to the affair. I think there were other reasons um, that caused the break as well. Ayn Rand wrote an article addressing at least part of the break. It's called "To Whom It May Concern" in her periodical, The Objectivist. So I think it was the May issue of 1968. She talks about the break. So Nathaniel Branden, he became her top student, and he was giving lectures on her philosophy, and with her being present, and I think they would participate in Q&A sessions after lectures sometimes. So he was, I guess, the most visible person promoting Ayn Rand's ideas, other than Ayn Rand herself, for many years. I think in the 60s. I think he started his Nathaniel Branden Institute in 1958, or maybe there was Nathaniel Branden Lectures. That was an organization which I think started in 1958, and then it became a more broad in its scope, and it became the Nathaniel Branden Institute, maybe the next year. Um, Anyways, around that 1959 or so. And then he was giving lectures in New York City, and Ayn Rand would be present often and participate in Q&As. And some other people also eventually participated, like Leonard Peikoff, I think maybe Alan Greenspan, Barbara Branden. So there was a group of people who called themselves the Collective as a kind of joke, since Ayn Rand was such an individualist. Um, this group around her called themselves the Collective, and some of these people would also give lectures. But eventually, there was a big break in 1968, and uh, Branden was cut out of the of Ayn Rand's circle, and that so the affair ended. I don't know if that's when the affair ended. Maybe the affair ended it slightly before the public break. I'm not sure exactly what the timeline is, um, but just for anyone who didn't know the story, they eventually they did have a big break, and the Brandons, both of them, not just Nathaniel, also Barbara Branden, she also was broken with, and then the objectivist movement, or at least Ayn Rand's part of it, continued without them, without the Brandons. Okay, so that was all triggered by Chachi's question. Let me now see what else has come in the chat. Chachi says, yes, Dr. Norton, that's the idea. I'm not sure what that's in reference to. Maybe that is the idea. Oh, well, here's another comment. Maybe he elaborates. He says, it seems that there is some standard that must be met to proceed to have sex with someone. A few people can meet that standard, and therefore you find yourself you find yourself having a loving, passionate affair. Okay. Okay. Just to There's some standard that must be met to proceed to have sex with someone, at least if it's healthy, right? I guess you could have very low standards and like have sex with a prostitute, um, but I wouldn't call that healthy sex. Um, just sharing sex with some random person, uh, sex is a special thing, so uh, I don't think it's good to just have it with any random person. Uh, Maybe if you're in desperate conditions, um, that could be reasonable or moral. Actually, there's one of Ayn Rand's novels. There's a couple of the main characters. I think they meet. I don't want to go. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it, but prostitution does figure into one of Ayn Rand's novels. But I think, given the context of a, um, it's a Soviet Russia, and it's a it's a terrible place. And I guess if for whatever reason you're caught in some situation where the options available to you are just there aren't many options, romantic options available to you, then maybe it's reasonable to resort to prostitution. But I don't think that's a good. It's something you resort to. It's not something you would ideally choose if you could avoid it. And you might think, well, it's just not worth it if you have to resort to that. And I think it could be reasonable to just choose to avoid it, avoid sex altogether. If or if you're like caught on a desert island, something with one other person who's a prostitute, so that's your only option. Uh, I guess I could see it going both ways. I can see someone who's just disgusted with the person and doesn't want to have sex at all. Um, Maybe just satisfy themselves, masturbation. Uh, but I can also see someone saying, all right, well, it's my only option, so I don't really like it, but I'm going to go for it. I can see both sides of that. Um, but that's a it's like an emergency, very weird kind of case, not the normal case. Um, all right, let me look at some more of these comments. Chachi says, I wouldn't recommend anyone read Barbara Brandon's recollection of the affair. At least take it with a grain of salt. I I am sympathetic to that comment. Uh, I read it many years ago, and as I mentioned, I also read Nathaniel Brandon's memoirs. But I wouldn't take it at face value as being true. I was curious to see what it said, but I would want to get independent verification of anything in there, um, because I don't think they are trustworthy. And I think Brandon, at least Nathaniel Brandon, admits to deceiving Ayn Rand. So he admits to having been dishonest, if I recall correctly. Um, so I do think that's important to bear in mind in judging their work. Okay, let's see some other comments here. I got some more from Primal, from Darwin. Uh, Another from Chachi. Just to keep the thread going a little bit more, so I'm not jumping around too much. I see that. Let me just read the last one from Chachi that came in, and then maybe I'll switch back to Darwin and Primal. Okay, so there's the last one from Chachi, 2:17 p.m. Pacific, says objectivist standards, Dr. Norton. One must meet an objective standard of values within a person before one can move the relationship toward a sexual one. Prostitution is of no value. Well, it is contextual. That's part of what I was saying. Like if you're an objectivist and you're caught in Soviet Russia, what would the objectivist standards tell you to do? I don't know if you read Ayn Rand's novel We the Living, but that's the one I was referring to. Or if you're an objectivist and you're caught on a desert island with one other person who is a prostitute, what do the objectivist standards tell you to do in that case? Um, I guess they would tell you that if there's a non-prostitute available, someone who does share your values, then you should go for that person. All things being equal, um, I don't know if, well, I'm not sure exactly how to process that all things being equal proviso. But anyways, if there's someone better than a prostitute who matches your values more, who is available, then yeah, I think it would be better to go with that person. Um, one was, and uh, you should try to get to know the person first, if uh, so that you know that the person actually does uh, share your values to some extent, at least. Okay, and oh, Chachi says he's read all the novels and the nonfiction stuff too. He says, I'm quite well versed in objectivist philosophy and am a user of the philosophy. I guess one can call me an objectivist. Okay. All right. Then you ask another question about privatization. All right. Let me switch back to Darwin and Nadal. I think Nadal is also, or Primal. Um, and maybe I'll come back to this question about privatization. Okay. Oh, I see. There's one other from Adwick Gore, um, who I haven't given much time with. So let me at least briefly address this one from Adwick Gore. How's life living in America? I'm pretty pleased with it. I like living in America. Never lived anywhere else, but it's good for me. I like the freedoms that I have here. Freedom to, I guess, some freedoms that I wouldn't have in other places, like maybe China or Russia, to criticize the government or certain leaders in the government. I like that I have freedom of speech, and maybe you don't have that as much in Europe. I think there are at least some places in Europe, there are hate speech laws, which I think prevent people from uh, criticizing certain, like Muslims or Islam. Aren't there some kind of restrictions in some European countries that may, or maybe that they have, they don't apply with equal force? Like you can't, you could be very critical of Christianity, but not Islam. So maybe the ways the laws are enforced are not equal, fair or equal. I don't know exactly, but I've heard that in Europe, uh, you, at least some parts of Europe, you can't be as critical of Islam as other groups. So I liked it in the US, at least now, for now. You can be very critical of Islam as well as other religions. Okay, I guess there's a lot more I could say to that, but um, I wanted to keep that pretty brief. So let me look back at some of these other chat comments. And again, just a reminder, if anyone wants to call in, I have pinned the link to the Zoom call at the top. And just let me know in the chat too if you want to come in. That will help me see it because I don't always have my eye on Zoom. I'm looking more at the chat. So if you let me know in the chat that you want to make a call or that you did call and you're in the waiting room, then it can I can let you on sooner. By the way, it's almost 2:30, so I've been going on for about an hour almost, and I never have a hard cutoff in mind in advance. So I don't know how long the stream is going to be. Usually they're at least an hour and a half, but depending on the kind of engagement I get, and depending on my energy level, it can go on for more or less time. So um, I think that'll I'll continue with my trend today of being on at least for hour and a half. So that would be at least till 3 p.m. Pacific time. I think I have enough material to talk about, just given the comments people have been making to get me through at least another half hour. So we can plan on at least that. All right. So uh, let me look at some more of these chats. So I don't know exactly where I left off, and as I said, I might jump around a bit. It's hard to keep track of all of them and get them all in order. It looks like Darwin is still talking about Israel. Um, I'm looking at 212 right now. It says Israel's 2008 nation state law enshrines Jewish supremacy. Palestinians in the West Bank live under 200 plus military orders, checkpoints, and permit walls, while settlers enjoy civilian rights. Uh, Over 4,000 Palestinian homes have been bulldozed since 2009, and 600,000 settlers occupy expropriated land. Gaza's crippling blockade traps 2 million people in a sealed enclave. Any one of these is sufficient. You've also dismissed Palestinians tried under Israeli military law face conviction rates above 99%. Roughly 99.7% of cases end in guilty verdicts, with only about 0.3% acquittals. All right, so there's several more comments from Darwin. A lot of these I don't know the I don't have independent verification of. I don't know if they're true. I just don't know enough about it to say one way or the other. Um, but I do remember reading in Alon Giorno's book. So he's a senior fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute. He's written a book about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's called What Justice Demands. And I remember in that book, he says that there have been wrongs done on both sides. So maybe some of these things that you're citing, he would also agree are bad things. Um, so in the main, like if you're looking at the forest and not just a few trees here and there, he's on Israel's side. But that's not to say that there aren't uh, some things here and there which you could fault Israel for. There are, he says, and maybe some of these things you mentioned would be examples of them. Okay, let's see what else. So those were from around 212. Looks like my, I don't know if my chat. Oh, it looks like the last chat that has come in was from Chachi at 222. Okay, which I already, that was the question about privatization. Okay, so let me go back and see if there's some more from Darwin or others. Pretty sure there were. So, okay, here's one from Primal at 1:49 p.m. Pacific. I guess you'll have a different timestamp if you're somewhere else. Primal says at 1:49, the Human Rights Organization wouldn't know what human rights is if it hit them in the face. It's a West-hating organization. Okay. Not sure if you have a particular human rights organization in mind there, but in any case, I think that kind of echoes some of the points I was making earlier. Then Darwin says settlers and West Bank Palestinians have laws unequally applied to them. They are most definitely engaged in ethnic cleansing. There is a strong argument to be made for genocide, but I'm not an expert in international law. All right, so there's the genocide claim. Not that they're actually doing it, but he says there's at least a strong argument to be made for genocide. Is there really? I mean, if they were engaged in a genocide, would Israel be killing all the Palestinians in its own territories or all the Arabs? Would it allow Arabs into the Knesset if it were engaged in a genocide? Would it be concerned to avoid civilian casualties in war by giving warnings to certain places where it's going to drop bombs? If it were engaged in a genocide, would it tell people to move to a certain section of the country, like move north or move south because we're going to attack this place? I don't see how those kinds of actions on Israel's part are consistent with claiming it's engaged in genocide. I've heard that it's actually the ratio of civilian casualties to casualties of combatants is actually quite low compared to other wars because of the efforts Israel has taken to avoid civilian casualties. Um, if that's the case, then again, why think they're engaged in a genocide? So, you want to address any of that, Darwin? Darwin goes on. Oh, this is I did read this one a while ago. He's asking in comparison to what is Israel a better or more rights respecting country? And he says in comparison to Lebanon, who occupied whom for 18 years, Daniel? You use my full name there. Why do you use Daniel? I mean, it's not. It's okay. It's. I'm just wondering why you use it. Is unless there's someone else. I haven't seen another Daniel here. What do I mean by better? Well, there's like the ability to join the government, be part of the Knesset. That would be one example. You can. It doesn't matter what your ethnicity is. You can still be part of the government. Um, then you say it's great that they have pride parades in Tel Aviv. Yeah, I think that's part of it, right? Rights for gay people, that could make them better. Rights for women. How about women? I don't think Islamic law or Sharia law, that's not too hospitable for women, is it? Rights for, what about criticizing the governments? Is it safe to criticize the government in these neighboring countries compared to Israel? That would be another way in which I think Israel's better. You have more freedom of speech. You're not going to be thrown in jail or killed for criticizing the government. And then Darwin says, however, when they constantly violate their neighbor's sovereignty, the claim is hollow. Uh, oh, I'm not sure. I mean, are you talking about people in the West Bank, people in Gaza? I mean, these are people, at least in Gaza, many of them who want to destroy Israel and kill the Jews, right? So, yet Israel is supplying Gaza with electricity and water, right? Internet. So that's another thing. If they were if they were engaged in a genocide, why would they be doing those things? Um, I don't know if you're still here, Darwin, but maybe you should answer that. That can be another kind of reality check or like a baseline check to make sure we're having an honest, reasonable conversation. Like, why would Israel be doing all these things if it's engaged in a genocide? Seems pretty ridiculous to me. Oh, Latent Prion is back. Let's see what he says. He says, I'm reading Nietzsche, and he is incredibly based. This base is the slang word that's been going around. Well, I guess I started to hear it a few years ago, but I think it's just like the new slang word for cool, right? So he says, I'm reading Nietzsche, and he is incredibly based. Also, Rand clearly took ideas from Nietzsche. For example, lovers of the earth, etc., but didn't credit him. Okay, so Nietzsche. I have read very little Nietzsche. I've mostly heard about him secondhand. But what I've heard about him is that, or at least in connection with Ayn Rand, is that she was influenced, at least in her early years, by Nietzsche, and she saw him as something of a kindred spirit, I think. But I believe that faded over time, and she eventually saw him as very opposed to her philosophy. At the time of the Fountainhead, which she was writing in the 30s, I guess the late 30s and early 40s, it was published in 1943. She originally was going to include some quotes from Nietzsche at the beginning of each part of the book. There are four parts to the book, and I think she was going to include a quote from Nietzsche at the start of each part as a way of showing his uh, his kindredness of spirit, I guess. I don't remember all the details, but I think that's just an example of how, at least at that point in her life, she did see herself as more aligned with him. But I guess around that time, because those quotes did not end up in the book. So maybe around that time of publishing the book, she learned more about him and came to think that he wasn't really on the same wavelength after all. Um, I, so I think he's an irrationalist. Like he didn't have a rational egoism in ethics. It was more the irrational, brute kind of ethics. I think she actually mentions him in the introduction to her book, The Virtue of Selfishness, as an example of the brute sort of egoist, the straw man, or the caricature view of selfishness or egoism. I think she uses the term Nietzsche in there, but I could maybe I'm not sure about that. But anyways, she came to distance herself from him, and I'd like to read more Nietzsche myself and get to know him more first-handedly, but not sure when that will happen because I there's so much I want to read. I think Thus Spake Zarathustra was one of the works that she, at least initially, responded positively to, but I'm not sure if there were others. Um, so those are some thoughts triggered by Latent Prion's concept. So maybe uh, I'm looking at my phone here because I got a different my chat on my laptop, which is in front of me, is at a different point in the chat than I can see on my phone, so I can look at different parts of the chat. It's helpful to go back and forth sometimes. Um, so I'm now looking at the latest chat, which is on my phone. Uh, so I don't know what ideas you think that Rand took from Nietzsche. Oh, you say lovers of the earth, etc., but didn't credit him. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Like, does that mean secularism? She's in love with this philosophy. She called objectivism informally a philosophy for living on Earth. Um, I don't know if she got that from Nietzsche. And she was heavily influenced by Aristotle, and he's the one who she thought highest of in terms of previous philosophers, and he was this worldly. Um, certainly relative to someone like Plato. This is symbolized in the famous painting, The School of Athens by Raphael. The two central figures. It's Aristotle and Plato are at the center, and Plato is gesturing up to the heavens or the other world, you might say. And then Aristotle has he's gesturing with his arm over this world, this earth. Um, I think there's some great symbolism there. So, did she get her love of this world from Aristotle uh, rather than Nietzsche? Um, I wouldn't want to rule that out. So I'm not sure why you say she got this idea of, quote, lovers of the earth, unquote, from Nietzsche. Um, I'm not sure about that. Okay, let's see some more coming in here. Oh, Latent Prion says based began like 15 years ago with rapper Lil B, the Based God. It was then picked up by 4chan to humorously mock black/hip hop culture. Then it got genericized to mean cool today. Okay. So there's some about the history of the word based. As I mentioned, I think I started hearing it maybe like 5 years ago. Uh, but uh, yeah, I don't know all the. So there's some more about the history according to Leighton Prion. And then he says, Nietzsche is a pleasure and a joy to read. Also, if you've only ever listened to Peikoff's History of Philosophy course, you should listen to Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy. That was a book as well, right? Um, maybe it's in an audio version too. Peikoff basically used that as his source. I don't think that's right. Peikoff is asked about histories of philosophy in his History of Philosophy course, and I don't recall him mentioning Russell's History of Philosophy at all. The ones that I know he's most spoken highly of are two. There's W.T. Jones's History of Philosophy. He was a German scholar, I believe, in the 19th century. And did I say W.T. Jones? Sorry, that was I got it mixed up. Wilhelm Windelband, or I guess it's pronounced Wilhelm Windelband. That's the 19th century German historian I was thinking of. Um, I think that was the history of philosophy that Peikoff spoke most highly of and learned the most from. But then the other one he mentions very favorably is W.T. Jones, who I believe was a 20th century American historian of philosophy. So those are the two that I think he probably drew on more than any others, uh, Windelband and W.T. Jones. Now, he might mention, I think he also mentions some others like Frederick Copleston. He wrote a long, I don't know how many volume history of philosophy. He was a Jesuit scholar, I believe. But I think he at least mentions that one. And I don't recall him mentioning Russell's History of Philosophy. And I do know he's quite critical of Russell himself as a philosopher. And when he gets to covering that period of history of philosophy, which is not necessarily to say that uh, Russell doesn't do better as a historian of philosophy. Maybe that is good. But I don't remember Leonard Peikoff commenting at all on Russell's history of philosophy. Um, okay, let's see. Okay, so there's a few more comments here from Latent Prion and Chachi. Let me see what Chachi has said. Uh, okay, he has this question about privatization. Give us an idea of how you would go about privatizing roads. And then a question about privacy rights. At what point would you cut off the right to have an abortion? At birth? Before? Okay. Um, I just want to see what else is here before I answer any of these. Then Chachi says some objectivists believe in open border immigration policy. Others are adamant about having a stringent border policy. Where do you land on immigration? Open border or heavily protected? Okay. And a couple more from Chachi. He says, along the same lines as Prion's question about Nietzsche, people should read Auberon Herbert. I'm amazed that Rand never knew or wrote about him. Um, okay. I've never, I've heard of Herbert, uh, but I haven't read him. Uh, okay, then there's, oh, he says Herbert died when Rand was just 1 year old. Okay. Okay. Maybe I should address some of these questions from Chachi. So I remember at least three. There's privatizing the roads, that question, and then there's abortion, and then there's immigration. Okay, so let me say something about those. Uh, as I'll start with abortion. I think a woman has a right to abortion until the baby is separate. So it has to be born first. So for anyone who doesn't know, just to give a little background, Ayn Rand, she was in favor of a woman's right to an abortion, and I don't know if she says or wrote, maybe she said it in a talk but didn't write it down, but I think somewhere, either written or in speech, I think she says that um, abortion should be legal until birth. And in any case, I do think that's the case. I think it should be legal until birth, because I don't think you're, I don't think you have rights until you are an individual. I think only individuals have rights, and you're not an individual if you are physically attached to somebody else. Um, and someone will raise about, well, what about conjoined twins? Okay. I don't mean attached in that way, where you're like stuck together side by side. I mean like you're on the inside of somebody else. Um, you're not an individual in that case, in the relevant sense. Um, conjoined twins can be kind of a tricky case, and um, but whatever complexities are involved in that case, I don't think come up in the case where you're growing on the inside of someone. So I think only individuals have rights, and you are not an individual if you are growing on the inside of somebody. You're a zygote, or you're a blastocyst, or you're an embryo, or you're a fetus. You know, these are this at different stages of development, but you're not an individual. So I think individuals, only individuals human beings have rights, not individuals of any species, right? You can be an individual dog or individual fish. So being an individual is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for having rights, on my view. Um, and in addition to being an individual, you also need to be a human being. So if you are an individual human being, then you're a being with rights. And we could talk more about that um, if you want. But I wouldn't even say you're a human being until you're born and you are individuated. I think you're a potential human being, but not an actual human being, I would say. Because I think human beings are individuals. Part of what it is to be a human being is to be an individual. And again, we can talk more about this. I know it's a hotly debated topic. Even many people who are fans of Ayn Rand's, some people they disagree strongly with Ayn Rand on this particular point um, about abortion, but I don't disagree. I think I agree with her that uh, you don't have rights until you're born and are physically separate from the mother. Okay. So let's see what else is. Oh, John Wayne is here. Hi, John. Um, okay, looks like John is saying something about the immigration issue. So maybe I'll go to that one next. So I'll just read John's comments. He says, open border, but at the same time, that's also hyperbolic of a realistic policy. It's not as though there wouldn't be a checkpoint and some processing to ensure whoever comes in isn't a criminal. But immigration and border crossings should definitely be easier, in my opinion, says John. Okay. I agree with him on that last one, that I do think immigration should be easier. Uh, as for complete open border, where it's like driving from one United State to another. So if I drive from uh, Texas to Oklahoma, there's not a checkpoint or anything. I just continue driving, and I see a sign at the border that says "Welcome to Texas" or "Welcome to Oklahoma," and that's it. So should the border be like that? Maybe that's as open as you can get. Some objectivists say yes, uh, the border should be like that, at least given a certain context. Like if you're not at war, an international border should be just like a border between states. Harry Binswanger, I think, is the most well known in the objectivist world for holding this view. And I'm actually sympathetic to that. If it's a war, right? If you know that people across your international border, like Israel is a state that's at war with its neighbors, I don't think it can have an open border. But if you're not at war, like if you take the US and Canada, if it's a friendly ally country across your border, then I think you could have an open border just as the way you do between states. I'm not sure why not. And I think one of the main points Harry Binswanger makes in favor of this view is that people are innocent until proven guilty, and there shouldn't be what's called preventive law. At least that's a term that I hear him use a lot, um, where you're assuming like maybe it's possible that some terrorists could come across the border and murder a bunch of people. And to prevent that, we're going to have this preventive law that says we have to screen people at the border. But why not do the same thing between states, right? It's possible that there's some maniac in Oklahoma who could drive across the border into Texas and kill a bunch of people. So to prevent that, should we have a preventive law which screens everyone at the Oklahoma-Texas border? He would say no. You're innocent until proven guilty, and it's a violation of everyone else's rights. Free people's ability to move. If you constrain them because there are uh, some bad apples, um, and likewise for an international border. Now, if it's systematic, right? If there's a huge number of people, like if you have something like Hamas, which is supported by a majority of the population, then it's systematic and it's not just a few bad apples here and there who maybe will get through and cause some problem. It's a very well-known threat. So I don't think that's a case where you can have an open border. But if it's not like that, if it's just a friendly ally country, then I don't see why it's wrong to have an open border just like between states. So I guess I'm open to hearing an argument that says you should screen people at an international border, even if the country on the other side of it is a peaceful ally, a friendly country. But I would need to hear an argument. I wouldn't. I don't think right now that you should be screened at that type of border. So there's some thoughts on the immigration issue. Let me see what else has come in. Uh, okay. So, so Latent Prion says, "Have you ever debated a vegan on their name the trait challenge?" I don't know what that is. No, is that like name the trait that makes the human different from a animal, such that it's okay to eat one and not the other? I don't know. That's just a guess. But no, um, if you want to elaborate on that, feel free to. John Wayne says, only last one, crying emoji. I don't know what that's in reference to. Then John says, I mean, wouldn't the US government have a duty to ensure people aren't a criminal, like they're not an escaped criminal, or in, say, Mexico's criminal database? Um, well, let me just read some more before I try to answer any of these. John says, not like, quote, anyone can cross over the US-Mexico border, even if it's a patch of desert, unquote. And then Chachi says, yes. Some objectivists say, yes, the border should be quite open. John says, I'm all for open immigration. Chachi says, maniac crossing state borders. Ted Bundy, ladies and gentlemen. Quick takes on these issues. Trump versus tariffs. Trump versus Greenland. Trump versus Harvard. Um, okay, maybe I'll give quick takes, but let me just read these other two first. Latent Prion says, yes, you guessed the meaning of name the trait correctly. Okay. Um, and maybe I'll say more about that a bit later. John says, it's, oh, in explanation of the crying emoji, he says, it's me crying because I'm sad you didn't agree with me. Oh, on immigration, I guess. You think I'm too in favor of open immigration? Because you said you would have checkpoints, right? You would have some screening checkpoints. Oh, yeah, I'm looking back. You said it's not as though there wouldn't be a checkpoint in some processing to ensure whoever comes in isn't a criminal. Uh, maybe on some borders, but I don't see that that's justified for some borders, like Canada. Maybe I'll use that as the best example. I guess Mexico is a little more concerning, but Canada. Um, so I guess what's the difference? Why, if you think we shouldn't have checkpoints between individual U.S. states like Texas and Oklahoma, but we should have checkpoints between the U.S. and Canada. Why? What's the difference? You think you're more likely to get a terrorist coming in uh, from Ontario, Canada, into the United States than you are to get a terrorist coming in from Oklahoma into Texas? Um, if so, how much more likely? Maybe that's relevant too. Like, I guess at a certain point, like, is it 1% more likely? 0.0001% more likely? Is it 50% more likely? I guess when you're dealing with so the percentage of likeliness, like how likely it is, I think is relevant to consider, but I don't really see a significant difference between the Canada-US border and the Texas-Oklahoma border. For all I know, it's even safer to let someone go from Canada to the US than it is from Texas to Oklahoma. I don't know. I don't see there's any like obvious difference. If there is a difference, it seems like it's probably pretty small. So if you're adamant that no, there definitely has to be checkpoints at the Canada-US border, but definitely does not have to be checkpoints at the Texas-Oklahoma border. Why? And you can make it even more fine-grained, like two counties within Texas. Um, should we have checkpoints at that border? Um, where do you draw the line? So if you think there's a threat, if you have good reason to think there's a threat coming across the border, then I think that's when something like a checkpoint can become reasonable. Okay. So just very quickly, so Chachi said he wants quick takes. So Trump versus tariffs. Well, Trump is in favor of tariffs, right? So it would be Trump's tariffs versus no tariffs, or at least different tariffs. Maybe that's um, the more sort of more relevant kind of question. But anyways, maybe you're basically just asking what I think about Trump's tariffs. I think they're bad. It's anti-free trade. I don't think there's justification for them. Yaron Brook has talked a lot about this. I don't know if you listen to the Yaron Brook Show. I listen to that show a lot, and he discusses this issue a lot. And I recommend you check that out if you haven't already. But I agree with a lot of Yaron Brook's takes, and I think I'm at least basically in agreement on his criticisms of Trump's tariffs. It's a violation of free trade. It's a kind of tax, the government stepping in between individuals or businesses who are made up of individuals. Um, it's a kind of coercion. Now, maybe you could say, uh, if you're at war with a country, kind of like the immigration issue, like things can change if you're at war, like Hamas and Israel. Um, I don't think you can have open borders there. Likewise, you might think you need to have a kind of restriction on trade if you have any trade at all. Maybe you need to have sanctions of some sort. Um, I think that is different than tariffs, though. Tariffs, you're taxing, well, at least immediately, it's a tax on people importing the goods, and that tax might get passed on to the consumers, but at least ultimately, if it's paid by whoever's importing, whether or not they choose to pass that cost on to the consumer, or um, but anyways, it's the government stepping in to force people to pay more than they would have chosen to pay voluntarily on their own, had the government not forced them to pay this extra 10% or 20% or whatever it is on whatever is being imported. So um, coercion is wrong, and that's why I oppose tariffs. People should be able to freely decide how much they're going to buy something for or sell something for. It's the government doesn't have a right to dictate to people that they must pay a certain amount. So that's my quick take on tariffs. Maybe that wasn't so quick, but um, you also ask about Trump versus Greenland. Uh, I haven't thought much about it, but just the way it strikes me as pretty silly. And maybe just a distraction, like from more serious issues. Like, was Greenland some kind of threat, or are they under some kind of threat? I guess they're under the protection of Denmark now. But I mean, what did something happen recently that all of a sudden it's important that Greenland be taken over by the U.S. as opposed to just, another nation that we trade with? Um, Maybe they have resources that we can uh, get from them by trade. I don't see any reason that it's urgent to take over this other country. I thought maybe this is just uh, a brute who's trying to make noise and be this big, trying to appear like this big, strong guy who can take over other countries. Maybe he has this very concrete bound conception of what it is to be strong and powerful. Like going back hundreds or thousands of years, you show your might, your power as a nation by conquering other territories, and the size, the sheer physical size of the area that you govern is like a symbol of how strong and powerful you are. But I think that's kind of a brutish way of looking at it. Um, and I do think Trump is pretty brutish. This is someone who I think wants to maintain power by force, as exemplified in something like January 6th. He's not respecting the rule of law, um, and he'll lie about the election in order to stay in power. I don't think this is someone who cares about the truth. Um, I think he has a brutish kind of conception of the world, and maybe he's just trying to make himself look big and macho by taking over a bunch of territory. Um, so those are just some initial thoughts I've had on this issue, not having looked into it much, but it seems pretty silly to me. And um, I'll just leave it at that for now. Um, so that's my off the top take on Trump versus Greenland. Let's see what else is in here. You also ask about Trump versus Harvard. By the way, I haven't looked into this much. In general, I don't follow the news that closely. Definitely more than I used to. But some of these, I'm not sure. I want to comment on just because I haven't looked into it enough. But maybe I can say a few things. Um, but in general, I recommend two sources who are more in the business of commenting on current events, um, which I think are very good. So one is the Yaron Brook Show, which I've already mentioned, and the other is the Ayn Rand Institute. They have a podcast, and they cover a lot of these issues that you're asking me about. And I'm not trying to discourage you from asking me about them. I'm happy for you to ask me about them because I'm trying to get a show going too, and I want to be able to make a living off this eventually. So by the way, if you haven't subscribed, it's a good time to ask you if you could please consider subscribing. If you want to help me get to my 1,000 subscriber milestone, at that point, I'll be able to apply to YouTube to have my channel monetized. So I value people coming to me and getting my take on things. So I don't want to discourage that at all. But I do want to be sensitive to the fact that sometimes other people are in a much better position to comment than I am right now, at least, given my state of knowledge. And if you want more on these particular issues, then I recommend those two sources in particular, the Yaron Brook Show and the Ayn Rand Institute podcast, available on YouTube. Um, but I'll do what I can to give my take as well. And I guess one of the advantages of my show is I engage with you, whereas I think these others, like the Yaron Brook Show, it's not a call-in show. Like he doesn't just take random people who call in. Sometimes he has guests on, but he doesn't have just an open line which people can call in on like I do. Anyone who wants to call in, just click that Zoom link. Which is not to say I'm going to necessarily take everyone who wants to call, but it's a more open kind of format. So I guess that's one benefit of coming to this show, the Dan Norton Show, live, which you might not be able to get from other places. And also the Ayn Rand Institute, they don't have just an open call-in show like this. And also at the level of text, like Yaron does have a live text chat, and he does engage with that through, you might know, he takes lots of super chats. Sometimes he engages with people who don't submit super chats. But there could just be a difference in degree there between his show and my show. Like today, for example, I've spent the entire time engaging with chat pretty much. Um, I didn't have like an opening monologue. I haven't had any guests call in, so 100% of my time has been devoted to people in chat. So if you like that, well, that's a benefit that you might get here that you might not find on those other podcasts. At least part of their time is devoted to something other than the chat. Um, and likewise with the Ayn Rand Institute podcast, I don't think they engage. I know that in the past they've had a live chat, but recently I think their videos have been pre-recorded. I'm not sure why, but I don't think there's any live chat at the moment. Um, Maybe they like to edit their videos. Um, so, anyways, these are just uh, features of my show that you might be able to find only here, as compared to at least those other two sources, which I do think are very good and I do recommend them. Um, but they all have their own advantages or disadvantages or benefits and side effects, different ways to think of it. Um, and this show could evolve over time, but at least right now, it's very heavily driven by you all. So thanks to you all for coming by and participating. And thanks for the likes and subscribes or subscriptions. Okay. It's now 3:20 my time. I said I was going to be on till, oh, at least 3. Wow, I've already gone past that, right? So we're coming up on the 2-hour mark in 10 minutes. We'll be at the 2-hour mark. And still got some people here, I think. Yeah, we still got 6 people watching right now, it says. So thanks for being here. I just want to take a quick look at my analytics, see if there's anything interesting there. Okay. Good to see a stream of people coming by. Okay. Okay. I'm going to come back to the chat. I might have to also take a break at least to get a bite to eat. Don't necessarily have to end the stream, but might just turn off my mic and camera for a minute if I want to get a quick bite to eat. Let me just take a look now at the chat, see what else has come in. So I didn't really say anything about the Trump versus Harvard yet. Maybe I'll come back to that. But then Chachi says, who do I think will win between Trump and Harvard? Oh, then Chachi says, yes, I watch Dr. Yaron Brook Show whenever it comes on YouTube live. Yes, I also give annually to ARI and especially ARU. That's the Ayn Rand University, which is part of the Ayn Rand Institute. I was a student at the predecessor or the precursor of ARU. It used to be called the Objectivist Academic Center, the OAC. And for many years, that was the name of their educational program. But a few years ago, they changed it to Ayn Rand University. And there's various things that they've changed about it. It's, I think, somewhat broader in scope in terms of the topics they offer courses on. But anyways, okay, so that gives me a little more idea of your sources and background. Okay, so I'm feeling a little hungry right now. So I'm going to take a little break and get a bite to eat and come back in maybe 2 or 3 minutes. I'm not going to end the stream, but I'm going to take a short break right now. I'm going to turn off my mic and camera. And if there's still people here after that, then I'll continue for at least a bit longer. Um, and I guess just depending on what kind of engagement there is, I'll decide how long to make this stream. But just going to take a little break now. So I will see you in a few minutes. All right, I am back. Got some energy now. All right, so let's see. Still got a few people here, it looks like. So let's see. Let me just maybe I'll say something about Trump versus Harvard, and then I'll see how I feel after that. Uh, Trump versus Harvard. Uh, so what happened, first of all? The Trump administration has threatened to withdraw federal funds from Harvard and I believe other universities as well, unless it makes certain changes to some of it, what it teaches. And I think this is a case where maybe it's best for me to just refer you to other sources. So I'm actually not sure if I want to talk about this yet. Maybe in a future show, but I haven't looked into it much. I've heard shows that the Yaron Brook has done about this, and also the Ayn Rand Institute. They came out with a podcast, I think focused mostly on Columbia University, actually. Uh, so maybe I should just refer you to those for now. Um, Also, partly because I think I do want to wrap up the stream soon. It's been 2 hours now. think maybe when people, if people see the stream later and they see how long it is, maybe they'll be more intimidated the longer it is. So if they see like a 5 hour stream, maybe they'll be less likely to click on it than if it's a 2 hour stream. So maybe that's a reason to end the stream earlier. um, so yeah, I think I'm going to end the stream now. We don't have any callers, do we? Let me take a quick look in the Zoom. No, it doesn't look like anyone has called in. All right, so I'm going to end the stream. Thanks everyone for coming by. I plan to do another stream on Wednesday. This has become my normal schedule, Wednesday and Saturday afternoons. The exact time can vary somewhat depending on what else I have going on. But if you subscribe, then you'll get a notification if you click that bell. So thanks for subscribing and liking the show if you liked it. And thanks for being here and participating. I do appreciate that. All right. Have a good weekend, everyone. And I will see you, hopefully, in a future live stream. Bye-bye.